The cockpit of Thomas L. Hayes Jr.'s P-51 Mustang shudders like a living animal as it knifes through the thin, freezing air 25,000 feet above the Ruhr Valley. The Merlin engine, a Packard-built V1657, snarls at 2,900 RPM, its vibrations crawling up through the rudder pedals and into Hayes's boots, as if the engine itself is warning him, "You're close to the edge." Inside the cramped glass canopy, the smell of burned cordite and high-octane fuel mixes with the metallic tang of oxygen from his mask. Every control surface trembles under the strain of high-altitude turbulence, and the control stick in Hayes's right hand buzzes with that dangerous feedback Mustang pilots learn to fear. The onset of compressibility. The place where aerodynamics begin slipping out of the pilot's hands and into the hands of physics alone. Hayes glances over his left shoulder. The mirror only shows blue sky and scattered contrails, so he cranes his neck. But the instant he does, his stomach locks. 5 specks, growing, spreading, dropping into formation. Me-109s. He knows the silhouette instantly. Narrow wings, tall tail. That wasp sting spinner housing the Daimler-Benz engine that could climb like a devil and dive with the murderous weight of German steel behind it. Already they're sliding into the classic Luftwaffe pincer, one pair climbing above him, one dropping low, and the leader holding center, waiting for Hayes to commit. He radios out, "Red lid, this is Duke. I've got 5 bandits. Repeat 5. Closing fast. I'm alone." Static answers him. His squadron had scattered, escorting the bombers through a patch of murderous flak. And Hayes had stayed behind to cover a damaged B-17 limping home. Now, with the bomber gone and his group miles away, he is alone in German airspace with half a staffel bearing down on him. The first cannon shells streak past his canopy, orange tracers ripping through the thin air like fiery needles. Hayes banks hard right, but that's exactly what the leader expects. The Germans tighten their turn, matching his move, staying high to keep their energy advantage. Hayes's altitude is bleeding away, his airspeed is dropping. And in this part of the sky, at this hour of the war, a lone Mustang without altitude might as well already be a smoking hole in a farmer's field. He pushes the throttle to the stop, 67 inches of manifold pressure, and the Mustang surges forward, but not enough, not nearly enough. The Germans stay glued to him. The lead 109 dives slightly, gaining speed, cannon ports already flashing. Hayes jerks the stick and dives too, but the sudden pressure slams his body into the harness. His vision narrows. The airframe groans as the Mustang drops through 400 mph, then 420. The wind screeches along the wings in a rising, desperate pitch. He knows what's coming, compressibility. The Mustang's one great demon. Push too hard, dive too fast, and the controls lock up. A pilot becomes a passenger, passengers die. Another burst of cannon fire slices past his left wing, close enough that he feels the vibration through the airframe. He's running out of sky, out of room, out of time. Then something flashes across his mind. Something he saw once during a training dive, something he'd been told never to attempt in combat, something every engineering manual insisted was reckless, dangerous, and borderline suicidal. But up here, with 5 109s diving in to finish him, suicidal is still better than dead. Hayes steadies his breathing, tightens his grip on the shaking stick, and mutters through clenched teeth, "All right, you sons of... Let's see if physics really works the way you think it does." Because to survive this encounter, Thomas L. Hayes Jr. is about to break the laws of physics. To understand why Thomas L. Hayes Jr. finds himself alone above the Ruhr Valley with 5 Me-109s tightening the noose, you have to zoom out and look at the brutal logic of the air war in early 1944. The 8th Air Force is in the midst of what historians will later call the attrition year, a period where strategy, doctrine, and aircraft design are all being rewritten under fire. The goal is simple: break the industrial spine of Nazi Germany. The cost is almost unthinkable. Heavy bomber crews flying with the 8th face a 1 in 4 chance of not coming home, a statistic that hangs in every briefing room like a silent ghost. The long-range escort fighters, especially the newly arrived P-51 Mustangs, are the only reason that number isn't worse. The Luftwaffe, battered but far from broken, has adapted. Their Me-109Gs and FW-190A8s swarm the bomber streams in coordinated attacks that are as deadly as they are elegant. They climb into the sun, dive through the formation with cannon blazing, and scatter into small, fast-moving groups that lure escorts away from the bombers. These formations are not random chaos. They are mathematically optimized attacks designed by combat veterans like Adolf Galland, men who understand the exact point where American formation discipline begins to collapse. The Luftwaffe knows the Mustangs will chase anything that threatens the bombers, and that instinct creates gaps. Hayes's squadron, the 357th Fighter Group, is stretched thin trying to cover a bomber stream nearly 70 miles long. Escorts are assigned to altitudes, sectors, and timing windows, but the Germans know how to disrupt that too. Their climb rate advantage at altitude, often 500 to 800 feet per minute faster than the bomb-laden American heavy bombers, means they can launch attack passes, retreat, and re-engage before the escorts reposition. Every minute the Mustang pilots spend chasing scattered fighters is a minute the bombers are exposed. Even worse, American tactical doctrine hasn't fully caught up with the Mustang's capabilities. The P-51 is incredibly fast, astonishingly maneuverable, and razor-sharp in high-speed flight, but the USAF still insists on rigid escort formations designed back when P-47 Thunderbolts were the primary long-range escort. The Thunderbolt doctrine is simple: stay close to the bombers, stay high, and intercept head-on attacks. But that doctrine cripples the Mustang's greatest strength, energy maneuvering. The P-51 excels when allowed to build speed, dive, and climb in sweeping arcs using momentum as a weapon. But escort orders force pilots into predictable patterns. That's the environment Hayes flies into, a battlefield where the enemy chooses when to attack, where to attack, and how, while American pilots are told to stay tight, stay ordered, and avoid unnecessary risks. Hayes has never been comfortable with that. He's a tactician by instinct, a man who reads the sky the way a chess master reads the board. He knows the Mustang is more than an escort platform it escaped. It is a raptor, starved for freedom, held back by doctrine written for slower, blunter aircraft. But even the best pilot with the best fighter can be cornered. And that's exactly what the Luftwaffe intends. Their new tactic, or the Five Fingers Intercept, concentrates multiple 109s into a converging fan, giving the lead elements altitude and the lower elements speed. The target, usually a Mustang, has no clean escape vector. Pull up and the high pair cuts them off, nose down and the lower pair overtakes them, brake left or right and the center element picks them off. That is the trap closing around Hayes. 5 fighters, each with an advantage in a different dimension, 5 angles of death. Doctrine says he should climb, training says he should turn into the attack, manuals say he should stay defensive, buy time, wait for help. But manuals don't survive contact with 5 Daimler-Benz engines screaming for blood, and soon neither will the old rules. Thomas L. Hayes Jr. grew up around engines. His father ran a small garage back in Thompson, North Dakota, a place where the winters were cruel, the skies were enormous, and a young boy could spend entire afternoons listening to the rhythmic clatter of pistons and valves. Hayes learned early that machines had personalities. Some fought you, some cooperated, and a rare few, the special ones, seemed to whisper their intentions right into your hands. When he first wrapped his fingers around the control stick of a P-51 Mustang, he knew exactly what kind of machine it was. Not just fast, not just lethal. It was honest. The plane told you everything it was doing, everything it wanted to do, and everything you were about to ask of it. The P-51D he flew this winter morning was Duke, a glossy silver machine whose engine, the Packard-built Merlin V1657, was tuned to perfection by Crew Chief Smitty Carmichael, a man who treated aircraft maintenance with the seriousness of a surgeon. The Mustang had its quirks, of course. Every pilot knew about the high-speed buffet that warned of an impending stall, the stiffening controls above 450 mph, and the thin laminar flow wing that gave the plane its brilliance and its temper. The laminar wing minimized drag, granting the Mustang phenomenal range and speed, but it also meant that airflow separation in a high G-turn could happen suddenly, brutally, without the forgiving mushiness older aircraft offered. Hayes understood all of this intuitively. He'd studied the Mustang's aerodynamic graphs the way other men studied maps. He knew how the elevator lost authority above 480 mph, how the nose tucked at high Mach numbers, and how the airframe tended to vibrate just before compressibility set in. He had even performed test dives, unofficially, at the edge of protocol, pushing Duke beyond 500 mph to feel where the controls began to go numb. His squadron mates called him reckless. His flight leader called him curious to a fault. But Hayes believed something else. You cannot fight an enemy if you do not understand the weapon you fly. And the Luftwaffe was an enemy he respected deeply. Their Me-109G, though aging, was still dangerous. Lightweight, nimble at altitude, and powered by the fuel-injected Daimler-Benz 605 engine, the 109 could pull vicious vertical climbs American birds struggled to match. What it lacked in range and ruggedness, it made up for with acceleration, and a cannon that could turn a B-17 into kindling with 2 clean hits. Hayes had learned the hard way that the 109's greatest weapon was not its speed or its guns, it was the discipline of its pilots. They fought with cold precision, attacking in pairs or trios, never wasting energy in wide turns. Where American pilots favored aggressive dogfighting, the Germans favored geometry. They waited for you to make the first mistake. That's why Hayes's philosophy didn't make sense to everyone else. He believed in controlled unpredictability. He believed that a pilot who behaved like doctrine expected was already halfway dead. But a pilot who danced just outside the rule book, who used the aircraft's quirks rather than wrestling against them, could open possibilities the enemy didn't anticipate. The problem? US AAF training was rigid. Escort pilots were drilled on formation discipline, altitude blocks, and engagement rules. Unapproved maneuvers were frowned upon. High-speed dives were explicitly warned against due to the Mustang's compressibility issues. The doctrine insisted avoid exceeding 450 mph in a dive. Hayes had already broken that number multiple times in training, not because he was reckless, but because he felt something no manual could explain. The Mustang pushed hard, behaved differently than engineers predicted. Its laminar flow wings didn't fall apart. Its frame didn't shudder into uncontrollability. There was a hidden envelope beyond the red line, a dangerous place, but a place he believed held an advantage, if he was willing to go there. Now, with 5 Me-109s converging on him above the Ruhr Valley, that forbidden envelope might be the only place left to survive. The altimeter unwinds like a mad clock as Hayes drops into the opening of his suicidal escape. The Mustang howls through 460 mph, then 480, each new increment chewing into the safe flight envelope the engineers at North American insisted must never be crossed. The airframe shrieks, the control stick quivers, the canopy glass buzzes at its edges as airflow slams against it in jagged sheets. Behind him, the 5 Me-109s tighten their pursuit line, each one committing fully to the dive. They think he's panicking, they think he's running, they think gravity is about to kill him faster than their cannons could. They think wrong. At 490 amplitudes, the Mustang's elevator begins to lock. Hayes feels it. A thickening, a stiffness at the hinge points, a creeping paralysis in the controls. This is compressibility, the invisible demon that had killed Mustang pilots who dove too steeply and too long. At these speeds, airflow can no longer curve cleanly around the wing or tail surfaces. Shock waves form. Lift changes unpredictably. The tailplane can lose authority entirely. Pilots call it the coffin corner, the place where you run out of aerodynamics and start relying on prayer. But Hayes isn't praying, he's remembering. Weeks earlier, he had done a dive test after maintenance. During that unauthorized descent, he'd noticed something most pilots never dared to explore. The Mustang's right rudder pedal remained responsive even when the elevators began to stiffen. A tiny detail, a subtle nuance, but one that suggested that while pitch control might degrade in compressibility, yaw control survived longer due to the Mustang's large vertical stabilizer and the direction of compressibility-induced flow separation. He had filed that away in his mind, a quiet observation with no immediate use until now. The Germans behind him don't know this. They also don't know the Mustang's other secret. When pushed past the red line with full, manifold pressure and a clean airframe, its laminar wings generate dramatically less drag than their Me-109 counterparts. And that means the Americans can accelerate longer before terminal buffet sets in. So Hayes tightens his oxygen mask, shifts slightly in his seat, and executes the move no sane manual recommends. He relaxes his pitch input, allowing the Mustang to dive even steeper, and uses rudder instead of elevator to stay in control. To the Me-109 pilots, it looks like he's lost control. His wings wobble slightly. His nose drops another 3 degrees, perfect. They think they're watching a man die, but Hayes is deliberately pushing Duke into the narrow aerodynamic slit between controllable compressibility and catastrophic dive lock. This is flying on the edge of physics, the razor-thin line where one too hard input would rip the wings clean off. 500 pt. The German radios must be lit with triumph. The Luftwaffe manuals insist American Mustangs are vulnerable in high-speed dives, pursue, close, destroy. It's what they've trained for, but their own aircraft betray them now. The Me-109G's thicker wing profile produces higher drag at transonic conditions. The Germans don't accelerate as cleanly. The leader's nose starts to buffet. Another pilot begins to fishtail, fighting compressibility harder than expected. And then it happens. Hayes kicks full right rudder and snaps the Mustang's nose a hair's width off center. The aircraft slews, slicing sideways through the airflow. That tiny yaw breaks the symmetry of the shock waves forming on his wings and stabilizer. The controls shudder back to life, not fully, but enough. He regains pitch authority milliseconds before disaster. The Mustang banks hard right at over 500 mph, a maneuver the manuals claim is nearly impossible. The Me-109s cannot follow. Their elevators are locked. Their wings load unevenly. One overshoots wildly. Another porpoises in the dive, forced to recover early. The leader breaks off entirely, afraid the dive will rip his own aircraft apart. In less than 2 seconds, 5 hunters become 5 scattered targets, each one out of position, out of energy, and out of luck. Hayes levels out, throttles up, rolls inverted, and climbs away with a grin. His suicidal dive trick has just rewritten the laws of the sky. By the time Hayes spots the familiar patchwork of English farmland beneath the haze, Duke is coughing on fumes. The fuel gauges tremble at the bottom of their dials. The left tank barely above zero. The adrenaline has finally begun to drain from his bloodstream, leaving his hands trembling just enough to make the control stick feel heavier than usual. He radios in with a voice that sounds steadier than he feels. "Steeple Morden, this is Duke Lid, coming in low and lonely." The tower clears him without question. The ground crew already knows any pilot returning solo after an escort run is carrying a story written in gunpowder. Hayes lowers the landing gear, wincing as the Mustang judders slightly on approach. He coaxes the aircraft down gently, tires squealing as they kiss the runway. The moment the canopy slides back, a blast of damp English air floods the cockpit, washing out the metallic stink of fear and cordite that clung to him for the past hour. Smitty, his crew chief, jogs up with a grin that evaporates when he sees the scorched paint along the fuselage and the bullet gouges near the left elevator. "Jesus, Duke, what the hell were you doing up there?" "Trying not to die," Hayes replies, climbing out with a stiff stretch. 5 109s they followed me down to, well, somewhere past the point the manuals would approve. That's when the ground crew notices something else. The gun camera is full. The distinctive whirring click means the film ran at high speed, capturing every second of the engagement, including the moment Hayes vanished into the dive that should have killed him. By the time he enters the debriefing hut, word has already spread. Captain Forsyth, the group's operations officer, stands at the head of the table with arms crossed, expression tight as a turnbuckle. "Sit down, Hayes." Hayes sits. Forsyth clicks the projector. The room darkens. On the canvas screen, the gun camera footage begins to flicker. 5 black specks growing larger, streaks of enemy cannon fire cutting across the sky. The sudden, terrifying moment when the horizon tilts and the Mustang drops into a slope that seems physically impossible. The room murmurs in disbelief. Forsyth stops the film. "Explain," he says flatly. Hayes does, calmly, technically. He talks them through compressibility onset, elevator lock, yaw control retention, shockwave asymmetry, all the aerodynamic subtleties most pilots avoid like they avoid lightning. He describes the exact moment the rudder responded while the elevators froze, the calculated risk of pushing the Mustang past 500 mph, and the fractional bank that broke the enemy's pursuit geometry. When he finishes, the room is silent except for the soft ticking of the projector cooling down. Forsyth leans forward. "You exceeded the red line, you dove past safe airspeed, you used an unauthorized technique. If you were wrong, Hayes, we'd be burying you right now." Hayes doesn't blink. "Sir, if I didn't try it, they'd be burying me anyway." For a long moment, Forsyth says nothing. Then Lieutenant Colonel Christian, the group commander, steps from the corner, arms folded, expression unreadable. Every pilot in the 357th respects him and fears disappointing him even more. "This maneuver of yours," Christian begins, "has it been tested?" Hayes shakes his head. "Not officially, but it worked. And if I hadn't done it, I wouldn't be here." Christian nods slowly, almost imperceptibly. Later, after the meeting breaks, Christian pulls Forsyth aside. The older man's voice drops to a low murmur that Hayes can just barely overhear through the open door. "Get engineering, get right field, get flight test. If this kid found a way to push the Mustang through compressibility, we need to know about it, and we need every pilot trained before Berlin. A new chapter in aerial tactics has begun, even if they don't realize it yet. If you're enjoying this story of raw engineering, bold flying, and WWII tactical innovation, make sure to subscribe for more deep dive aviation history." The weeks following Hayes' harrowing escape feel different across the 357th Fighter Group. Subtly at first, then unmistakably. Engineers from right field arrive with clipboards and furrowed brows, interviewing Hayes in a cramped briefing hut that smells of damp wool and burnt coffee. They listen intently as he describes the dive in precise, almost surgical detail. They ask him to recreate every movement of his feet, every fingertip adjustment on the trembling stick, every heartbeat between compressibility onset and recovery. Then the tests begin. Mustangs go up with experimental dive profiles. Instructors push aircraft beyond the traditional red line under controlled conditions. High-speed wind tunnel data is rechecked. And suddenly, the mythic threshold that terrified pilots, the moment where controls froze and the aircraft plunged into the unknown, becomes something else. Not a death sentence, a maneuverable window, treacherous, unforgiving, but real. The tactic spreads quietly at first. Flight leaders begin briefing. If you're bounced and outnumbered, there is a maneuver Hayes pulled, extreme risk. Use only if you're dead otherwise. Pilots practice partial versions in training dives. They become comfortable with the Mustang's subtle, pre-stall vibrations, with the specific tremor the elevator gives just before compressibility begins to bite. Squadron by squadron, the tactic grows from rumor into doctrine. And then comes its first true test. Big Week, February 20th to 25, 1944. The 8th Air Force unleashes a tidal wave of bombing raids against Germany's aircraft factories, ball-bearing plants, and transportation hubs. It is the largest air campaign ever executed over Europe, and the Luftwaffe throws everything it has into the fight. Entire Gruppen of Me-109s and FW-190s rise to meet the American formations. Flak bursts so densely around the bombers that crews describe it as flying through a black blizzard. Loss rates spike. The sky vibrates with the thunder of engines and the bark of guns. Before Hayes's breakthrough, this kind of battle meant disaster for the escorts. The Luftwaffe's coordinated dive attacks, especially the deadly vertical slashing passes, often overwhelmed the defensive screen. Not this time. The Germans attempt their familiar tactic, a five-fingered intercept, forming a fan of converging attacks. Mustangs break toward them. The Luftwaffe pilots commit to the dive, fully expecting their American opponents to peel away, to hesitate, to respect the invisible aerodynamic wall that had always kept them safe. But the Mustangs do not pull away. One after another, American pilots shove their throttles forward, roll inverted, and dive straight into the high-speed window Hayes opened. Their laminar wings slice cleanly through the air. Their rudders remain responsive while Me-109 elevators stiffen. The Germans overshoot, their formations collapse. Their textbook dives become disorganized plunges as Mustangs carve sideways through shock waves with controlled bursts of yaw. In squadron debriefs after the first day of Big Week, pilots speak the same words again and again. They couldn't follow us. They locked up in the dive. They overshot by 30, 40 yards. They weren't expecting us to push past 500. Kill ratios rise sharply, 3-1, then 5-1, then 7-1 in some units. Bomber losses drop. Escort commanders realize something extraordinary. Hayes's maneuver hasn't just saved him, it has shifted the geometry of combat. Soon, group leaders formally adopt the technique. By late spring, squadrons begin teaching it openly. Training packets include diagrams of airflow separation on the tailplane, instructions on yaw recovery, acceptable throttle settings in compressibility, and emergency procedures for elevator lock. What began as a desperate seat-of-the-pants survival gamble by one pilot evolves into a standardized tactic known informally as the Hayes dive. Its effect is unmistakable. The Luftwaffe's high-speed diving attacks, once their most terrifying weapon, lose their edge. Suddenly the hunter cannot follow the prey into the deep end of the speed pool. Suddenly the one advantage the Germans relied on evaporates. and suddenly American air superiority is no longer just a goal. It is inevitable. By the time the war grinds into its final months, Thomas L. Hayes, Jr. has become one of those names whispered in briefing tents and chow lines, not with the swagger reserved for aces covered in kill markings, but with a quieter, deeper respect reserved for the pilots who changed the way everyone else fought. Hayes is still the same man who grew up in a North Dakota garage, still the same pilot who flies with an almost mechanical intuition, but the war around him has transformed. The Luftwaffe that once stalked the skies with near-mythic prestige is now a fractured shadow of its former self. Too few veterans, too little fuel, too many losses inflicted by the very tactics Hayes helped pioneer. Yet the legacy doesn't feel real until the day he steps into a forward maintenance hangar on a cold March evening in 1945. Duke sits there under the fading sunlight, silver skin dusty, exhaust stains streaking her flanks like battle scars. Hayes walks past mechanics wiping their hands on rags, past armourers finishing inspections, until he sees a bomber crew approaching from across the tarmac. 4 men in leather jackets and smudged scarves, looking awkwardly out of place. "Lieutenant Hayes?" the bombardier asks. Hayes nods. "That's me." The crew chief nudges the navigator forward. The man clears his throat. "We, wanted to thank you." He points to their B-17 parked outside the hangar, its nose art-chipped but still bright. "Your squadron got jumped 2 days ago south of Hanover. We were limping, fuel leak, no guns on the right side. We saw a pack of 109s diving on us and thought that was the end." Hayes tilts his head. "But it wasn't." The man shakes his head. "No. Because we watched you, or someone flying like you would drop below them, straight down like a damned anvil. They tried to follow and they just couldn't. They scattered. One nearly tore his wings off, trying." Another crewman steps forward, holding a small cloth bag. Inside are ration chocolates, a silver Zippo with a scratched 8th Air Force emblem, and a bottle of something amber and valuable enough that bomber crews only gave it away when they felt truly indebted. "For saving us," the bombardier says, simply. "We don't have much, but we figured folks like you don't always get what you deserve." Hayes accepts the gift with a stunned nod. Gratitude hits him in a way no kill tally ever could. In that moment, he realizes the truth. Innovation in combat isn't about glory, it's about survival. One pilot pushes a boundary, and suddenly dozens of crews live to see home again. A single maneuver discovered under panic becomes a life raft for men he's never met. Months later, Hayes finds himself in a very different hangar, this time at Wright Field, standing beside engineers studying post-war aerodynamics. The Mustang is being phased out. The future belongs to swept wings, thinner profiles, high subsonic jets. An engineer with round spectacles and a slide rule tucked into his shirt pocket asks Hayes a simple question. "When you kicked the rudder during compressibility on set, what exactly did you feel?" And suddenly he's back in the sky over the Ruhr Valley, hearing the Merlin scream, feeling the airframe twist, reliving the moment he slipped sideways through physics itself. He explains it again. The subtle buffet, the shockwave breakup, the restored pitch authority. The engineer nods, jotting notes that will someday influence test flights of the P-80 Shooting Star and later the F-86 Sabre. The legacy is clear. A lesson born in the chaotic violence of WWII becomes a cornerstone of jet-age combat, teaching future pilots how to survive high-speed airflow transitions, compressibility zones, and the razor-thin boundary between control and catastrophe. A war ended, a pilot aged, but a maneuver survived and shaped the world beyond him. If you'd like to support more deep cinematic aviation history, consider joining the Patreon or leaving a like. It keeps these stories flying. Dawn creeps slowly across the English countryside, painting long golden streaks across the empty runway where Hayes stands beside his Mustang one final time. The war is ending. The missions are fewer. The skies that once vibrated with the roar of thousands of engines now settle into an uneasy quiet. Hayes runs his hand along Duke's aluminum skin, feeling the warmth of the morning sun gathering on the metal. The aircraft is grounded today. Routine maintenance, they say. But to Hayes it feels symbolic, like a warrior finally allowed to sheathe its sword. He looks up at the sky, that vast pale blue arena where death and brilliance constantly intertwined, where 1 second of hesitation could destroy you, and 1 second of courage could reshape the future. Hayes knows he will miss it. Not the fear, not the violence, but the purity. There was something deeply human about it. A place where instinct, training, and raw nerve met the unyielding laws of physics. No politics, no strategy. Just a man, a machine, and the unforgiving sky. In quiet moments like this, he thinks back to the dive, that impossible, suicidal plunge where everything he knew, everything he had been taught, said he should have died. And yet in that moment he felt more alive than ever. Not because he outflew the enemy, but because he dared to trust himself over doctrine. He dared to listen to the machine. He dared to push past the red line. War is full of moments like that. Moments where the textbooks fail, where training collapses, where only the pilot's courage defines the outcome. Hayes had seen men follow every regulation perfectly and still die. He had seen others bend the rules just enough to find a sliver of survival, but very few ever dared to leap into the unknown the way he did that day over the Ruhr Valley, not recklessly, but with a rare, almost mechanical intuition. That dive taught him a lesson he would carry long after the war ended. Machines have limits, but humans draw the line between possible and impossible. It wasn't the Mustang alone that saved him, nor was it luck. It was a willingness to test the edge of physics, to gamble on his own understanding of lift, drag, airflow, and instinct, to challenge an enemy that thought it understood the rules, only to discover the rules weren't finished yet. He exhales slowly. A gentle wind rustles the grass near the runway. Somewhere in the distance, a lone Merlin engine coughs to life as another Mustang taxis across the apron. The sound brings a faint smile to Hayes's face, that deep, throaty growl that carried entire bomber formations home, that broke Luftwaffe attacks that echoed across Europe like the pulse of the air war itself. Years from now, when the age of jets renders piston engines obsolete and dogfights become high-altitude chess matches fought at the edge of the sound barrier, pilots will still study what happened that day. They'll analyze the shockwave asymmetry, the yaw-induced control recovery, the high-speed buffet signals Hayes recognized by feel alone. They'll talk about energy management, dive profiles, and aerodynamic windows. But the truth will always be simpler, subtler, and far more human. Some pilots fly the machine. Some pilots fight the machine. But a rare few, the rarest few, understand it. Hayes belonged to that final category. As he turns away from Duke and walks toward the hangar, the morning sun glints off the Mustang's canopy, casting a thin, brilliant reflection across the tarmac. For a moment, it looks like a blade catching light, a reminder of a warrior's edge sharpened not by fear, but by boldness. Because in the end, it wasn't just the Mustang that turned a suicidal dive into a survival miracle. It was the pilot who dared to push past the red line and came back to tell the tale.